Hi, and welcome to another discussion about disabilities. Today we'll be talking about a disability that is a bit more severe. This is deaf blindness. Deaf blindness does not mean that you cannot see completely and you cannot hear completely. It is a breakdown in vision and hearing that creates a severe barrier for communication and interaction with your environment. And this combination is so incredibly difficult to overcome just because 80% of what we learn is learned visually, either by observing people, by reading, by just taking in our environment. Environmental print. We have access to reading before we even learn to read through environmental print. And then hearing is our basic form of communication. Before we even learn to read or write, hearing is how we actually first start to distinguish sounds. So of the 5 senses, these are our primary receptive senses that we rely on for the majority of our information. So it is very important that from a very young age, there is scaffolding and support for these children to interact with their environment. Unfortunately, lots of the reasons why children explore their environment is because they see something and they want it, or they hear something and they go after it. Creating opportunities for a student or a child that is deaf and blind means that you have to make their environment good for them to interact with. This includes having tactile objects and then maybe moving it and the child moves after it, having touch, right? So knowing that there's someone near them and maybe moving slightly away and they follow, creating opportunities for the child to move and explore their environment, and so they get familiar with their surroundings. This goes into our classroom environment. Classroom environment is so important when you're working with your deaf-blind students. Organization of space, of course, is something that we always talk about. Making sure that everything is a consistent space. Making sure that materials are in the same space. Making sure that if we have activities, they're in a set location. As much as we love to switch things up, when you have a student who is deafblind, make sure that you have routine and consistency so they feel safe to focus on learning and communicating instead of trying to figure out what's around them. So as a result of having that deafblindness, it's important that they learn how to interact, because usually that breakdown in interaction can lead to cognitive delays or disabilities. In fact, 66% of students that have a deafblindness will also have a cognitive disability, and 57% will have a physical disability or delay. And this is just due to them not being able to interact or get their brain working and making sense of their world, moving around their world. So again, very vital for them to feel safe in their space so they feel safe to explore and learn how to communicate. And to a large extent, your classroom management is going to be the driving force for your student. Deaf-blind students need to feel safe in the classroom. They need to feel accepted in the classroom. And they need to feel a part of it. Their success depends on the students' and the teachers' goodwill and sensitivity, right, to make their world understandable. And learning to communicate with their peers is probably one of the biggest boundaries that children who are deafblind face. It's also, though, the greatest opportunity. Getting them to communicate with others and letting them express their thoughts with peers is massive, because these individuals can participate and have a very full and fulfilling life if they learn how to communicate and if they have a community that creates a space for them. So tactile interest is a great way to show that you have the same attention, right? So teachers, peers, siblings, they can continue conversations with someone who is deafblind purely by finding the object that has that child's attention and showing an interest in it, whether it's touching the object or maybe putting your foot against the student and looking at the object as well, so they realize that you have their attention. I would say as a teacher, try to avoid touching their hands because that will limit them in their ability to touch other things. I would rather say touch foot to foot or leg against leg, so that there is that mutual interest and they can tell that you're paying attention, but you're not hindering them in being able to explore or possibly explain using sign language or something about what they are interested in. Once they feel comfortable with you, then it's more likely to start a conversation. Touch the object. What do we think about it? What do we feel about it? And making sure that you give pause time. Pausing is so incredibly important. For the student has to first understand, receive the message, process, and then respond. Pausing time, give the student as much time as they need. This is not a time limit where you give a student 5 seconds to respond. No, this is a longer wait time because they need to create a response and they need to take the time to process the input. It's not something you see and you've got it, right? So you have to give them time to process it. So wait time, processing time, organization of your space is important. And then organization of activities. Make sure the student knows when we're beginning an activity. Make sure they know that we're still in the middle of the activity, it's still happening. And ensure that the student knows when the activity ends. If we don't have cues to let the student know what is happening around in the classroom out of their immediate space, we're leaving them out, we're isolating them. So ensuring that you include them in the activities and let them know when they begin and end and what you're doing in it makes them feel a part of the activity and lets them interact with their peers during the activity. Another big thing is teaching your students to identify themselves to your student. Let the student know when you come up to them who they're talking to or who they're conversing with. And this is important because it helps them feel safe. Can you imagine if you were blindfolded and you were wearing mufflers and someone just came and touched you? I don't know about you, but I would be rather startled and I would be very hesitant to interact with that until that person addresses who they are. So what might happen is a peer trying to make communication touches a student but never says who it is. So now they're just in their personal space but not identifying who they are, and the student might not respond because they don't feel safe. They don't know who this is, so they're not responding to the touch. Right? So make sure that your students know this. Make sure that their touch is the person identifies themselves when they go to make contact with a student. And then materials. Label them. Not just with big print. Label them with the printed word, maybe the braille on top, and a tactile symbol. So maybe you have a cubby full of blankets. Have a little piece of cloth on the edge so they have a tactile. They can see, oh, this is the blankets. Make sure that you have tactile symbols and labeling around the classroom so that they have the interaction with the braille and they have the tactile symbol. It's a great bridge for the students to have a tactile symbol and the braille. They start to make connections. Right? This is our version of environmental print for students. And creating symbolic communication, not just we're looking at the same option, but talk about like symbols that the student can use to communicate their thoughts, their feelings, and interact. So most of the communication systems that are used with deafblind students are touch cues, object symbols, tactile symbols, sign language, ASL or signed English, right? Picture symbols, gestures, and braille. These are your go-to for creating a communication system with that student. And a lot of this takes time. If a student needs output, some adaptive technology is you can have a communication board with tactile symbols on it, and a student can press for a certain response they want. So if you're trying to work on their output, before they can develop their own output, they can respond and interact with people without forming their words. It may take them a while to form their words with the hearing loss. So keep those things in mind. And help your students comment on the child's experience. You comment on the child's experience. Use sign language, speech, or a symbol system that is accessible to the child to comment on their interests. That commentary creates a rich language for the student. You're giving them exposure to language without having to put writing in front of them or have braille in front of them. This is a great way where you can just have running commentary, small comments, things that they can hear, right? Because they don't have complete hearing loss, or if they do, they don't have complete vision loss, so you can sign with them. And name the object, say the name, sign the name, talk about it, say what color it is. Start creating descriptions and access to their language. That access to language will help them communicate better. It will also help them develop their own thoughts, and it will be great for those students later on when they're trying to communicate. They can say already, they can describe, they know these objects by name. So when they are learning a formal symbol system, they can identify what they want to talk about. So the last thing I want to talk about is very, very important, and that is transitioning. Transitioning is vital to deaf-blind students. When they're transitioning to adulthood, because there are about, according to 2007, there were about 10,000 students that were under 21 that had deaf-blindness. These cases are a little bit more rare. Their daily living does need to be considered. And it's not going to take one agency or one person to provide for all the complex needs that the student is going to have. So it's important that when you're doing the transitioning, the individual is the focus of the transitioning, and what they would like to do, where they would like to live is very important. But then a collaborative team of agencies, of specialists, of therapists, of occupational therapists, of speech pathologists, friends, family. This is a huge collaboration to ensure that they are involved in the community and they do not get isolated, to ensure that they have a voice in planning for their future, and to ensure that they can fulfill what they would like to do and be involved, continue to be involved with friends and family. I think there is nothing worse than leaving school and becoming isolated, especially as a deaf-blind person who does not have the same access to transport and to facilities without someone guiding them, or without having been there so many times before. Right? This is very, very important to make sure that the transitioning plan involves everyone and addresses so many of their complex needs. And going off of that, those complex needs also are devices. So you can have an electronic braille writer, so it produces braille and then transfers that into synthetic speech. There's also the optical character reader, so it converts printed text. They can wear headphones that can be translated into audible speech. Neat thing, those optical character readers can also be translated into braille. So whatever system that student uses, whether they have a more severe vision loss or a more severe hearing loss, work with them to find out what they need. They need a braille, or if they can, wear headphones. Braille note takers, and these can be connected to a printer to create a printed copy. And so these are just things that can help you in the classroom and help them. So just as a quick recap, there are about 10,000 according to 2007. Medics say there are more now, just due to modern technology and medicine leading to more premature births surviving. So because of that, the premature babies sometimes have more deaf-blindness. So we're seeing an increase in these students, but it's about between 10 and 12,000 students under the age of 21. For these students, create a rich language commentary using symbolic systems so that they can interact and talk back. In the classroom, use tactile symbols, use braille, plan ahead, plan your classroom, plan your materials, and plan how you're going to teach and who you're going to teach with, ensuring that student has peers in the classroom that know how to interact, or that you as a class can learn how to interact. Transitions, ensuring that your student is the focus of those future plans, and ensuring that your student feels safe. Number one, before they get to communicate, before they even interact with anything, they need to feel safe. So ensure that their space and their privacy and their physical space is safe, and that no one is going to encroach in that space, so they can just focus on learning and communicating. Good luck.